Okay, to be one of the best midfielders in modern day hurling, you've got to have an awful lot, and that's what we're here to talk about here with Michael Verney. Brought to you by 65hurls.com. You're going to need sticks for the summer, so that's a good place to go, the best place to go. Right, Michael Verney, best midfielder in hurling right now. We're going to go through some of the main counties just to see who we think is the absolute cream of the crop. It's a fairly specialised position. I don't know how often you've played there. I've played there a few times. It's a position where you can actually quite easily get lost because, if you're a wing back, you've kind of got that zone of the field and you've always got to be there. If you're full back, you're generally minding the square. Your wing forward, you've kind of got a starting position everywhere. But midfield, the ball can you can spend half the day just going over your head, over and back, and you're trying to sprint to what rugby people call the breakdown. But you might never actually get on it, and you could have clocked up more mileage than anyone.
Yeah, you can be everywhere but nowhere. Do you know what I mean? You can be in different positions, but you can be well away from the ball. But there is a part of the role where you have to be everywhere, and you don't necessarily have to be on the ball. You have to be plugging position. Say from an opposition puck out, you're nearly expected to be in a line of 5 across your own half back line. For your own puck out, you're nearly expected to be in a line of 5 on the opposition's half back line. You kind of have to be everywhere. You have to be in the full back line nearly to take a ball off the cornerback or the full back. You have to be in the half back line as a link man between the defence and attack. Then you have to be able to get forward as well. So what you're saying there is interesting because say with GPS stats and things like that, you could put up 10 or 15k easy. I'd say that's standard at midfield, but you could do very little or have very little of an impact on the game. So I suppose the way hurling's gone now, if people go along on puckouts, it can easily just go over your head and keep going over your head. But I think midfielders have been drawn in a bit more now, and I think people realise that maybe they were becoming a small bit redundant with the way the game is going. So they have a myriad of different roles that they play. And I suppose the best midfielders are able to link the attacking, the defending, the tackling, the harrying, the carrying ball, and being a link man. They're able to link it all. While other lads maybe, particularly if they haven't played in the position a lot, they can kind of be running from Billy to Jack but not really doing anything.
You can have these enforcer midfielders, like Michael Verney was the typical sort of one and probably the high point of them. Nolan McGrath is now a playmaker. Keane Lynch is obviously a playmaker. They both have scores in them. Keane Lynch probably even has goals in them. Other lads are actually brilliant at driving up through the middle. Think of Kevin Moran when he was there, especially in 2017. Himself and Jamie Barron both got a nice couple of scores between them, and including goals. There are those guys who like to drive up the centre. Davy Burke is going to get you score after score. Other lads are protectors and sort of spies to make sure if they can pick up ball in front of their half back line. Another enforcer is maybe Will O'Donoghue, who's more in that Michael Verney role, albeit he's probably fairly early in his career. He's looking like he's going to be a serious player for years to come, a little bit early. But we start off with Cork. Darragh Fitzgibbon and Bill Cooper are probably the two guys there at the moment. Mark Coleman has maybe been given a couple of goals in that sort of position. Bill Cooper, I think, a real leader, and he's the sort of guy who can maybe organise the team around him, because it's important to have someone organising it from your half back. Well, actually, from every line. If you're on the full back line, you're organising the lads in front of you. If you're half back line, organising in front of you, pulling back a Bill Cooper. But I think he's a really, really underrated player, and probably not a bad starting point, because generally in every game he's really effective. Darragh Fitzgibbon is going to produce those YouTube unbelievable moments, but I think over 70 minutes of a game, Bill Cooper probably ties the team together more.
Yeah, it's a good starting point because it's the balance of your two midfielders. Darragh Fitzgibbon's going to get in a lot of ball and break tackles and going to probably get in a lot of scores. Bill Cooper's going to allow him to do that. The way he plays midfield will allow him to do that. He'll probably sit back. He could be at times nearly kind of like an auxiliary centre back and letting your centre back slip back a small bit. So unless he did that kind of dirty work, and particularly around a lot of breaking ball around there and even just getting tackles in, not allowing lads to break the line, he allows Darragh Fitzgibbon to go forward. As a cornerback, I'd always appreciate the lad that does the bit of dirty work and not necessarily the bit of flashy work. So I think Bill Cooper's a brilliant midfielder. As you say, he's a bit of a throwback to your kind of Michael Verney style midfielder, maybe without getting forward like Verney did.
Yeah, and David McInerney has been midfield with Clare this year, and I think before Brian Lohan took over, you probably couldn't have imagined him. You could imagine him anywhere in the backline, but I didn't think we'd see him midfield. He has been quite impressive there, and he's the sort of iron fist for Tony Kelly's velvet glove or Colm Galvin or whoever ends up in there. So he'd be probably more in the line of Bill Cooper, whereas Colm Galvin, would he be a bit more like Jamie Barron, that type of midfielder?
Galvin is a stylist, I would always say. Yeah, if you look at his percentages when he's on the ball, he rarely gives the ball away. Like he's the man usually to set up attacks. He's also the man that can score from 100 meters and things like that as well. But he's probably played a more deep lying role in recent years. He actually didn't play throughout this year's league. He was absent, so it kind of allowed David McInerney to go out to midfield. I don't necessarily think McInerney is that kind of iron fist necessarily. I think he's the sort of lad that can get 3 or 4 points as well, and he does it. I suppose one thing I always said about midfield, and particularly in recent years, if you look at like Keane Lynch or Noel McGrath, there was the potential for them to get bottled up in the forward line, particularly with teams dragging players back, and maybe they weren't allowed to be creative enough. Let's say Keane Lynch started off corner forward, but now he's out midfield. There's a load of grass to be creative within. So I kind of think being out midfield, it allows you a bit more freedom. Maybe that's what Brian Lohan taught with David McInerney as well. We'll release the shackles of maybe playing fullback or cornerback or wherever he was in the full back line, and we'll allow him out midfield to do a bit of hurling, because if you have that in you, no more than Noel McGrath, there is a bit more grass to work within. So like Noel McGrath, I'd always say around midfield, if you have an enforcer midfielder with you, it allows, say Michael Breen would be the type enforcer, would say he would do more of the maybe hard yards than Noel McGrath, but it allows Noel McGrath to be on the ball more, to maybe not have to go from box to box. You would rarely see him going from 21 to 21, but he is the outlet. When the defenders pick up the ball, they're immediately looking, okay, where's Noel McGrath? Same at Limerick, where's Keane Lynch? Because they know they're going to distribute the ball really well into the forwards.
Actually, you make a good point there about the likes of Keane Lynch and Noel McGrath, and maybe even Jamie Byrne, because if I remember correctly, he first was coming on the scene in the forward line. That coming out to midfield, not only does it give him more space, but you're actually facing the play. Like if you're playing in anywhere in the forward line, you're generally turned back looking at the ball and the goals is that way. But if you're midfield or half back or something like that, generally the play is in front of you. So like when these guys who are magicians on the ball, when they get it, they can look up and find a way to put a dagger through your heart. So I think that's a big part of it. Whereas if you look at the likes of Dublin's midfield keeps changing over the last few years because different lads have left the panel. Like Sean Tracy isn't on it this year, Dara O'Connell isn't there. And even Ben Smith, he kind of left the year before. But like Diarmuid O'Keefe, like he'd be someone to drive up through the middle. I know like Jake Malone is a guy who can drive up through the middle. Paddy Purcell of Laois, these are lads who can all drive through the heart of you. Davy Burke, a converted wing forward. Well, sorry, he was previously a wing forward when he first came on the scene, and then he ends up scoring loads of points as being a midfielder. But that whole point of just moving out to midfield and all of a sudden you can become someone who looks up and actually dictates the play because you're facing upfield rather than your back to goal, I think is a key one.
Well, number one, you have to have the ability, and all those lads that you've mentioned there had the ability. They were just maybe being crowded out a bit too much. So bringing them out to the middle of the field, as you said, some difference between having your back to the goal and facing forward when you're getting the ball. So all those lads, when they get the ball, they're invariably facing forward. And once you're able to face forward, you can look up, deliver a ball, or go for a score. By
the way, I meant Ben Quinn, not Ben Smith. Sorry, just a little.
Yeah, no panic at all. Just another one as well. I think if you look at when we go through the counties here, the ones that have loads of options. If you look at Limerick, I think Limerick have 3 all-star midfielders fighting for 2 spots. So they have Keane Lynch, former hurler of the year. They have Will O'Donoghue, who was nominated for an All-Star last year. And to me, if he stays fit over the next 5 or 6 years, he could dominate midfield. You have Darragh O'Donovan, who we both think was an All-Star in 2018 when they won the All-Ireland. So they might have to find a new spot for Darragh O'Donovan. They might have to put him in the half-forward line. But they have a wealth of options there. If you look at Cork, we mentioned Bill Cooper and Dara Fitzgibbon. If you look at Tipperary, I think if you're looking at the upper echelon of midfielders, you would really only have Noel McGrath in there, but you would have the potential to move Brendan Maher out. But then when you look at some of the counties in Leinster, and we look at Kilkenny, and you're thinking, you go down through the years, Derek Ling, Cha Fitzpatrick, Mick Fenley, and now you're thinking, ooh, right, we're not exactly sure who they're going to play in midfield. Killian Buckley started the All-Ireland final last year, was very, very rusty. Seems to be back and have a spring in his step this year, but we're not sure where he's going to play, whether it's half back line or midfield. Conor Brown was kind of a debutant last year in midfield, ended up cornerback in a couple of league games this year and got a bit of a scutcheon off Shane O'Donnell. So maybe Paddy Deegan has played there before. And Pádraig Walsh has played there before. So we're kind of up in the air about who they're going to play there. Dublin, we don't really know who Dublin are going to play there. Haven't had maybe a settled pairing. Whereas you look at Limerick or look at Wexford and then you're thinking, yeah, Dermot O'Keefe is always going to be playing midfield and is always going to be playing that role. Kevin Foley's going to be named midfield. He's going to play sweeper. Lee Moog McGovern's probably going to pull back midfield. And then maybe to have maybe a player like Aidan Nolan who kind of would float in and out of that position. But I think it is hugely important to have a settled midfield pairing. Number one, for your defence. I think to make sure that those lads are providing basically cover for your defenders, but also that when the forwards are in trouble or anything like that, they know that who's going to be there and who's going to be kind of looking out for them. So I think there's definitely a correlation between the teams that have lots of options and the teams that don't have that many options.
If you're probably going the last 2 years, who are we talking being right up at the very top? I think Noel McGrath, a lot of people felt he should have been hurler of the year last year, and like there was a marked improvement in his own personal performances. I mean, sure, he actually ended up as a sub in the final game of the 2018 championship against Clare, because I remember that photograph from down his hands and knees and a little girl coming over consoling him, and he was wearing the number 24 jersey or something like that. But then he established himself probably as the premier midfielder last year. Cian Lynch is up there. Dermot O'Keefe having some unbelievable performances. I think Dara Fitzgibbon could establish himself as the number one midfielder in the country, but he actually could end up as an unbelievable wing forward or half forward. Again, it comes back to that point. I think he's at his best when he's coming onto the play and bursting through defences rather than having his back to goal, then having to turn and gain some speed. So I think that's why he'll probably always be a little bit further out the field. But who would you consider as the high point of the midfielders right now? We are going to have to narrow it down.
We definitely have a wealth of options. It's not one of those positions where you're struggling to pick out 2 or 3 lads. If you're looking at the upper echelon lads, I'd say you're looking at Noel McGrath, Dermot O'Keefe, Cian Lynch probably as well. But for me, my number one would be Jamie Byrne, an absolute energizer bunny for Waterford. I think in particularly 16 and 17, when Waterford were going in any way well, he was absolutely outstanding. It's the ground he's able to cover, how good he is on the ball. We'll never forget that goal in extra time in the qualifiers against Kilkenny when they eventually beat Kilkenny. That surge and run through the middle. I just don't think he's had much. He's had a couple of little knocks in that the last couple of years, but he's also had very little cover from other players. There's been his performances have stayed quite high and to a decent level, but a lot of lads around him haven't. I just think he's the prototype modern day midfielder. I think in a couple of years we'll probably be saying maybe Cian Lynch is maybe more consistent, but over the past 5-6 years I would have Jamie Byrne right up there for me. He'd be my number one.
Really? Yeah, that's interesting. Like he's beautiful to watch. You know, those dancing feet, he can get a score. He just gets out of the most unlikely situations, which is something that Cian Lynch does as well. Oh, if you could put a couple of attributes of different midfielders together. The little flicks and tricks of probably Noel McGrath, the feet of Jamie Byrne, the vision of Noel McGrath, and actually his stick passing, Paddy Purcell's ability to run up through the centre, but then again Dermot O'Keefe's as well. Jeez, it's hard to narrow it down, isn't it? Because we actually have a lot of brilliant midfielders.
This is like I remember watching BBC Snooker one time, and they put together the prototype snooker player, and they took Sean Murphy's cue action and John Higgins' temperament. Like but there's so many really good attributes here. Like if you threw in Dermot O'Keefe's elusiveness and his ability to find space as well, and his ability to get a score, like there's so much there. Colm Galvin's poise on the ball. It said Noel McGrath's touch. Remember the ball he put in over the top for Callan against Laois last year? There'd be very few other lads that would do it. Cian Lynch's tricks. But for me, when you put it all together, I think style and substance. I'd be looking at Jamie Byrne, and I'd be looking at him now, and I still think in 5 years' time we'll still be talking about him as one of the best midfielders.
Yeah, and don't forget, we're brought to you by 65hurls.com. Go there to get all the best sticks. I think I'm probably going to give it to Cian Lynch, even though a couple of years ago I nearly thought Darragh O'Donovan's performances were slightly higher in Cian's Hurler of the Year season. But he's got the engine, he just delivers pretty much every single day. I know he probably had a tough time in the semi-final against Kilkenny last year, but in general, I think he's so like such high performances all the time. If Noel McGrath puts together another season like he did at midfield, then yeah, maybe you put him number one. But yeah, I'm just about going to go with Keane Lynch. You're just about going with Jamie Barron. What about the best combination? What's the best midfield combination? Because, like, does Bill Cooper come back into it? Because we've talked about that sort of leadership. He wouldn't have the same skill, speed, or some of the other like skill as some of the other lads. But he's right up there in terms of effectiveness.
Now this is a different conversation. Like if someone to me were to put Keane Lynch and Jamie Barron together in the best midfielder pairing, I just couldn't have it. As good as both of them are, I just don't think they'd complement each other. I think they would do a lot of the same things, and maybe the defence would be exposed.
Get in each other's way almost.
Yeah, I think a Colin Galvin will come into it because he also can play that deep lying role. Probably, to be honest with you, and he's only been playing for the last year or two. I'd probably have Will O'Donoghue in there because I rate him unbelievably highly. I suppose a lot of it is from, and you would have seen him firsthand with Napirsig in the club finals with Kula. I just think he's relatively young. He's only mid-20s. I think he has the ability to be an enforcer for Limerick over the guts of the next decade. I think he could dominate games. And that's not dominate games by, scoring 1-2 or 1-3 or anything like that. Just dominate games with big tackles, big turnovers. And I think he'll allow Keane Lynch and even Darragh O'Donovan, if he's midfield as well, he'll allow them to flourish. It's funny though, you won't likely see Will O'Donoghue and Darragh O'Donovan together in the midfield pairing for Limerick because they both do the same thing. So that's why I'd probably go with something like Will O'Donoghue and Jamie Barron.
Yeah, that's fairly tantalising actually. Will O'Donoghue rarely does the wrong thing in the ball, and at the start of the year he came on in the league game against Tipperary when Tip were a mile ahead. But he came on and he kind of changed the game, to be fair to him. Ended up getting red carded, but he had set up a goal and just completely changed it. We already know what he's like with Keane Lynch at midfield, so I think it would be pretty boring to pick those two as a combination. I like what you're saying with Jamie Barron, but I think Noel McGrath and Will O'Donoghue, that would also be very, very tasty.
Yeah, no, that'd be nice. Yeah, imagine the amount of cover Will O'Donoghue would offer to Noel McGrath, and you can just see Will O'Donoghue every time he gets the ball. Where's Noel McGrath? Where's Noel McGrath? You get the hand pass off. As you say, he's one of these lads. He's a real team player as well. He's not going to try and do the fancy Dan thing. He'll do the right thing on the ball. So I think that'd be a nice pairing. Either that, or you could try in Bill Cooper. Bill Cooper with any of those stylish kind of midfielders that we've talked about would work very well as well. But for me, it's Will O'Donoghue and Jamie Barron.
Great stuff. That's our best midfielders and best midfielder pairings. Thanks very much, Michael.
Cheers.